Shelves have just been added to Minecraft and they are really, really good. At first, I thought they seemed really gimmicky, but I've been playing around with them for the last few hours. And these are now my new favorite block. I genuinely think these are going to change building forever. But today I'm going to show you a couple of building tricks that I've learned using them, and I'm sure that builders are going to be finding new ways to use them for years. But this is just what I've discovered today, and I'm going to show you why I'm so excited about these. And I'd like to quickly just apologize because this video is going to be a complete mess. This is kind of a look inside of how my brain works. I've just been building and building and building. But let's start with the first thing that I looked at, which is pillars. I found out pretty quickly that shelves are perfect for footers on these pillars. And they especially look good with quartz to make these Roman looking pillars. But you can also use them with wood to make these kind of pillars that you'd see on like a ship holding up a sail. And so I just quickly put this building together using them, and they look so cool. Another thing you can do with shelves, which I didn't even mention, is you can put blocks into the shelves to store them. And so I used some glass panes to just add a bit of color to the bottom and to add a bit of a shine to the pillars. And it works really nicely. I also used some shelves to round off the edges a bit more, seeing as shelves are basically just vertical half slabs, which we've been asking for absolutely ages. Now, another great use for shelves that you'll think of right away is they are great for window shutters. Normally you'd use trapdoors like this, but it always looks a bit off. But shelves look like they were actually designed to be window shutters. They look so cool. And you can obviously do this with any type of wood, like this bamboo one just looks infinitely better. And to play around with this, I built a medieval house quite quickly, and it looks so cool with these shutters. I even mixed some stairs in, and they just have this really cool design that I am absolutely in love with. It looks kind of like a modded build, but like in a really good way. It still looks Minecrafty. Now, the only downside I've found to putting items in these is that if you go far away, the items will actually despawn from your vision, which isn't the end of the world because the actual shelves still stay. For stuff like beds or chests, they'll actually despawn as you go further away, but because the actual block remains, you can still use it to build with. It's not too big of an issue. And coming round to the side of the build, I obviously used some down here for the shaping again, but I also made this small balcony using shelves, as they make such a good banister. Normally I'd probably use trapdoors here, but they can kind of look a bit flimsy and unsafe, but this just looks absolutely perfect. And I also made these potted plant sections, and I put some buttons in just to add a tiny bit more detail. And I just love this house so much. But after playing around with this window, I wanted to make more windows, and so I didn't bother making the actual build, I just made some windows by themselves. And I made this really cool cherry blossom one. And I found that if you put fences in the shelves, you can make this netting kind of look, which just looks so nice. And I also made this window, which is inspired to look kind of like a cottage from something like Sleeping Beauty, and I think it looks so good. And my favorite part is definitely that I've put these doors in the shelves, which just look like handles for the shutters, which I think is such a good detail. But once I made some window frames, I also thought it'd be cool to design some door frames. And I just made these entrance sections, and I really like how they look. This one's probably my favorite with this oriental kind of design, once again using the fences and some gates, and it just looks really detailed. I'd really like to see a whole house made in this style. This one's not finished, but while I was experimenting, I realized that shelves work as full blocks in terms of fences connecting to them. Because normally, obviously, if you place down a fence and there's something like a glass pane, it's not going to connect. But if you place it next to a full block, it will connect. And so you can get this really cool gap using these. And I obviously didn't finish this build, but I did move on to working on this archway, which uses that technique here that makes some really nice shapes. And I didn't want to spend too long experimenting with this because it might just be a bug, and I don't want to waste my time if it gets patched out, but I did make this really nice Torii gate, which is quite a simple design, but you can see how it uses them to stretch out the fences, and it just looks really simple but really nice. Now, one of the most obvious uses of these new shelves is just to make fences. You could put these around your base or just on either side of a walkway, and I'm sure loads of people would just use these for fences. And so one use I found for them was for a house like this, which is meant to look quite realistic and suburban. They just work perfectly as a fence around it. And both sides of them have a really good texture as well. Normally I'd probably use a fence here, but this just looks more realistic, seeing as fences normally don't actually have loads of gaps in them. And while I was building this, I also just put together the swing design, which I think looks really cool. It only took me like 10 seconds to come up with this idea, as these are really intuitive to use as blocks. They work so perfectly. But on the topic of the fences, I then just made a couple of other fence designs, starting with this really basic one that I think loads of people will be using, where you just kind of stack them along and then put a trapdoor on top. And I think variants of this will be very, very common to see in Minecraft worlds. But I also made this version where they just kind of differentiate back and forth, and it makes this really nice shape, which I think looks great. And then finally, I made one also experimenting with this fence thing I talked about before. And I'm really hoping they don't get rid of this, because I really like blocks like this that kind of stretch the game's logic and give you like new unique ways to build. I really hope it stays like that, especially because this fence just looks really nice. But another decoration as well that I kind of looked into is potted plants. This is like the most widely accepted potted plant design at the moment. This is what everyone seems to be using, but you can put these new shelves around the base to make them look a bit more premium and more decorative. And the best thing is that you can really customize these designs with the items in them. So there's this one which is meant to look quite floral, and then I made this version with the sunflower which looks really nice inside of the shelf. And I think my favorite thing to put in them is actually banners, because the banners take up the full shape of the shelf, so you can make some really nice stripe designs. And it's probably worth noting as well that you can customize the banners before you put them in. So I've seen people like using them to spell out words and stuff, which is really cool. The only issue for me is that I have no clue how to actually make banners custom, because I don't play survival, but it still looks cool with a full color banner. But for the potted plants, I really liked adding in these pottery sherds as well. They just look really cool and they make it look very rustic as well. I can imagine these in kind of like a dojo or like an abandoned temple. This would look really, really neat. And another block you can put in them is also this new block. The copper golem statue works really well as like a gargoyle. I can imagine these like on top of like a cathedral or something, just wrapping around the entire build. Now, one thing I haven't even touched on yet is that these have a really cool texture on the back of them as well. So you're basically getting two new blocks in one. You're getting this really cool new block over here, which everyone's speaking about, but you're also getting this texture that you can build with. And I'm pretty sure these are unique to the shelf. I think especially the spruce one is going to be really useful to build with. And so this isn't something you'd probably actually build, but I just kind of made a wall exclusively using shelves to show off some of the back textures. Like the crimson one over here looks quite nice as well. And I really like the dark oak one as well. You wouldn't guess that this whole thing is made just using one type of block, apart from obviously the grass and the alliums, but I really like it. I can imagine some people only using the back texture to make some really nice builds in the future. But I thought I'd try and use one of these to make an actual house rather than like this mess. And so I decided to pick out the pale oak one, and I used it to make a really nice modern mansion. And I think this comes together quite nicely. So obviously the back of the shelves are over here. You can see them used quite a bit in the walls, and they add such a nice texture. And I also used some of the shelves to make this doorway section, which is quite nice and small. And I also used some shelves up here to make this small banister for this porch area. But I think my favorite use of the shelves in this build is for this gate that runs around the whole thing, as when you have bits that like split out, it just kind of works absolutely perfectly. And then I don't want to cover loads of like furniture ideas because, like I said, I've just been playing around with this for a couple of hours. I'd like to make a second video on some furniture ideas, if you'd like to see that at least. But I did add a tiny bit of furniture to the house. The first thing being these sun chairs out the front, which I think look amazing with the bamboo shelf. And you can also use these to just make basic chairs as well, which I think a lot of people will be using. But then I also made this really quaint barbecue design, which looks great with the small shelves and everything. And then going into the house, like I said, I didn't spend too long on interior, but I made a pretty basic living room, which is a bit of a mess. But I really, really like this kitchen design. Being able to use doors to look like shelf doors and then also trapdoors to look like handles, you can make some really cool cabinets to put around your kitchens. And it just looks like really realistic. And then I also made an upstairs, but I didn't build any stairs, so let me just fly out quickly. And I just made this small bedroom design, and I put loads of discs up here just as like a nice pattern. I don't know if I like it, but I was just trying something new, which is kind of part of the fun of a new update. But all in all, it looks okay up here. But yeah, that's everything that I managed to come up with in my couple of hours of just playing around with shelves. But I'm really, really excited to see what everyone else makes, especially when this becomes live on Java finally. Please do let me know in the comments what you think about shelves and if you like them, because like I said, these are my new favorite block. I really, really like these. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.